There are some very scary things in my own bedroom. The spider in the corner, that thing in my closet, the absolute mountain of used crusty tissues between the wall and my bed. I have allergies. Well, apparently other people sometimes have it worse, because some of us have seen living nightmares in what's supposed to be your safest place. Enjoy these 5 allegedly true stories of horrifying things seen in your bedroom. If you want to share your story, go to darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for backpacker stories and Halloween stories. Thank you. The Humming Woman by SylveonKnight. I don't really like to talk about this story, as it gives me chills just to bring it back up, and I think most people don't really believe me. I was in middle school around 13 years old. It was summer break. So this must have been around 8 years ago. Some parts are a little bit fuzzy, but the most important parts are trapped in my mind, like scars. My best friend Miran and I were hanging out at her apartment, as we normally did on our days off school. Her father and older brother weren't home at the time, so it was just us two. I never really liked her apartment, because she once told me that her apartment complex was haunted. Now, I didn't believe it until she showed me proof. I was shown her front door opening and swaying on its own, even without any wind or anything around it. There was a time she felt a cold spot in her room and dragged me over to see that it was real. This was creepy because there was no air conditioning in her room. I've even seen for myself dark silhouettes standing behind you in the mirrors, but if you turned around and look, they wouldn't be there. Surely all of these things could easily be explained to a mature adult, but to a young kid, I completely believed it after all of that. It didn't really stop me from spending the night at her place, and when I did, I wouldn't get a wink of sleep because I'd be too scared. But I couldn't let Miran know that, otherwise she would probably make fun of me. We were childish and stupid, I know, but that was the way middle schoolers were. One day we were hanging out, just chatting about cute boys and what we should do that day, when there was a knock at her front door. We were on the couch by the door, and she got up to answer it. At the door was her friend who also lived in the complex just across the way from her. I can't remember her friend's name, so let's call her Kay for the remainder of the story. Kay talked to Miran in Spanish for a minute or two before motioning for us to follow her and left. I asked Miran what that was all about. I didn't know Spanish. She told me that Kay wanted to collect ice from her sister's apartment and wanted her company, and said I could tag along since I was there. I didn't really want to go, but I also didn't want to stay alone in that apartment either, so I went with them. We went over to Kay's place and saw she was grabbing a container for the ice. I remember asking Miran why she wanted to get ice from her sister's place, and she told me that their fridge wasn't the kind that made ice, and that you had to manually make it with trays or buy some. Kay then walked over and spoke with Miran again for a moment, before properly introducing herself to me. Then we made our way over to her sister's apartment, which was on the second floor of the complex. As we headed over there, Miran began to explain to me the background story behind the complex and the sister's apartment. I think she was trying to scare me, which she did often as she knew of my fear of the supernatural. According to her, the apartment complex is built on top of what used to be an asylum. She said that many people passed away there, and so the complex as a whole was haunted, and not just her own place. That made sense to me since I've always had the feeling of being watched, whether it was in the stairwell or Miran's place, and even in the parking lot. Miran told me that Kay's sister's apartment was where the nursery used to be. I found this odd, because I didn't know asylums had nurseries, but as a 13-year-old kid, I didn't know much about anything, so I just believed her, even if I had a feeling she was just trying to spook me. When we made it to the apartment, I immediately got a bad feeling. the sort of feeling that sends shivers down your spine and makes your stomach start to churn and knot up. I could feel a cold breeze coming out from under the door, and I immediately got goosebumps. I didn't want to step inside that apartment. Kay pulled out a key and began to open the door. We saw that the apartment was empty, as Kay's sister was gone to work. By this point, 2 of Mirren and Kay's friends joined us, wanting to hang out with us as well. They were Sarah and Anna. At that point, I sort of felt like a fifth wheel, but I kept quiet, as I didn't really want to start anything. The 4 of them entered and I lagged behind. Again, I didn't want to go in, so I figured just standing outside would be good enough, since I could see the kitchen from the spot outside. But sure enough, Mirren gestured for me to come in after them, and reluctantly I listened. The room felt incredibly cold, which was strange since it was a hot summer day and we still had the door open, but it was like the heat stayed outside and did not want to come in. It was also very dark inside, with only the light from the aforementioned open door pouring in. I didn't like it one bit. Every second that I spent in there was making me more and more antsy. I just wanted for Kay to hurry up and get the ice so we could leave. I noticed that I was not the only one who was feeling strange about it. Mirren was beginning to look finicky and was speaking to Kay in a nervous tone. Anna was standing closest to the door, looking like she wanted to go as well, and Sarah was standing in the living room looking down toward the bedroom. That's when I noticed her eyes were extremely wide. The only one that seemed to be unbothered by this place was Kay, as she just went to the fridge and started collecting ice from the freezer right away. Sarah called Mirren over and pointed down the hall. She said something in Spanish, as Mirren made her way over. When Mirren looked down the hall as well, she practically screamed, saying something in Spanish. I had no idea what they were looking at, but I knew I wouldn't like it. Mirren power walked over to her previous spot while looking at me, telling me to go check that out, to look down the hall and tell them what I saw. At that point, I was thoroughly creeped out. I slowly walked over despite my entire body screaming at me to not move. I didn't want to look like a chicken though, but what I saw, I'll never unsee. There stood a woman adorned in a white gown. She had a bluish-white glow about her, and she appeared to be floating rather than standing. She was so tall and so slender, it was shocking. I couldn't make out any facial details, because she was standing in the bedroom down the hall, standing over the bed, looking down at it for some reason. I could tell that she had long hair though. Sarah at this point asked me in a thick Mexican accent if I saw her. Slowly I nodded and looked over at Mirren, barely able to whimper, asking who that was. I was already almost in tears by then, and I'd never felt so horrified. She shook her head. She didn't know who that was. Then Sarah let out what sounded like a mix between a gasp and a scream. I quickly shot my head back and saw that the lady was now gone. No trace of her, just an empty bedroom and an unperturbed bed. I quickly ran over to Mirren and hid behind her, wanting to leave the apartment, but I still tried my best to be brave. The tears were ready to pour out. Anna was already out the door when she called out to Sarah that there was someone standing behind her. When me, Sarah, and Mirren turned to look, we all screamed in unison. The woman we had seen in the bedroom before was now 5 feet behind Sarah, and she was staring at her. The woman's face was easier to see now, but her face was blurry for some reason. Every time I think about it these days, I always see a different face or expression in my head, like my mind is trying to fill the gap, because not being able to see someone's face clearly from that distance just didn't make sense. Sarah cried out and ran out of the apartment, knocking over a dining chair in the process. I watched her as she ran. The woman made no attempts to move or react, she continued to stare straight ahead of her. When I blinked, she was gone again. Just as I began to look around for her, praying she wasn't behind me next, I heard Mirren's terrified scream and ran out of the apartment. She was sobbing outside, her face wet with tears. She mentioned that when the lady disappeared, she heard humming and felt breathing an inch away from her right ear. I was confused and was about to say something when I began to hear it coming from inside the apartment. After being petrified for a few moments, I finally managed to force myself to move. I practically bolted out of the apartment, finally done trying to be brave. I didn't care what the others thought of me. I wanted to get away. And the only one that still didn't react was Kay. She came out of the apartment a minute or two later. She handed out the ice to Mirren and turned to look up at the apartment. She explained that she basically grew up in that place, so the occurrences were nothing new to her. She said she was immune to it by now. Mirren and I made our way back to Mirren's place, where I proceeded to freak out and break down crying. I told her I never wanted to go back there again, and she agreed with me, telling me she didn't expect anything to happen, as she hadn't experienced anything in there before, or anything of that magnitude. I went home soon after, and I was able to calm down. I still do not know if Mirren's backstory to the apartments is true. We don't really talk anymore, so I can't just ask her. I did try to research it, but could not find anything about the apartments being an old asylum. I even told my dad about the story a few days after, but he dismissed it because, according to him, before the apartments were there, it was just an old dirt lot. But what we saw was very, very real and does not answer the question, why did we see the humming woman? Balloon by Creepsbridge97. When I was young, my mom used to help out elderly people in their homes. I even have a vague memory of sitting on the couch in an old bedridden woman's home, marveling at one of those mechanical chairs that can go up stair railings. I also remember an old man named Ben. I knew of Ben the most because I would often accompany my mom to his house while she aided him, and during our carpools, I would be intrigued and curious whenever he held on to the overhand hanger above the door. And I remember thinking how nice he was. Though being 5 years old, most things are blurred. When Ben passed away, I did have understanding of what that meant. Some understanding anyway. But it didn't faze me like it should have. I was only 5. But it got stranger when my parents decided to buy his house and move in. Now I know what you're thinking. Buying the house of a recently passed person was pretty weird, but my only cause for concern about the matter back then was the fact that I would no longer be across the street from my best friend. As for the house, it was fairly normal, a well-kept old place. It had a basement and an attic, which was new to me, and I eventually even made the attic my bedroom. Now, when I was a kid, I had a severe fear of the dark, and I had to have my bedroom door open a bit so that the light from the hallway would seep in a little. Just outside my bedroom door were the towel cabinets, so there wasn't much to look at. It was in that bedroom that I had my first unexplained encounter. I was trying to fall asleep one night, having a lot of trouble. I was staring out into the doorway where the light was seeping in, when I saw something bizarre. A red balloon floating past the doorway. I remember being confused and half asleep. I don't remember being scared, but I probably was. Just due to odd circumstances, I can never remember what happened after I saw it. I do remember telling my parents in the morning, but they didn't believe me. The balloon was floating off of the ground, so there was no way I mistook it for our cat, and there's no cat with that shade of red. Fast forward about 5 years or so. I was somewhat half asleep, dreaming probably, when I was jolted awake. I felt something grabbing onto my arm, biting and scratching at it. I remember an extremely sharp pain, a pain that I only actually felt after I woke up. It was not part of the dream. I thought a wild animal had gotten into my room, but when I turned on the light and looked at my arm, there was nothing there. No mark, no blood, nothing. But the weird part was, when I looked toward my bedroom door, it was open, even though I'd been shutting it for a few years now, not nearly as scared of the dark as I used to be. What got into my room? I could still feel the stinging sensation, the remnants of something unseen hurting me while I was trying to sleep. I just really need some closure. What's happening to me? What am I witnessing? And how do I make it stop before it gets worse? My Strange Bedroom Story by Mr. Baconbro123. Unfortunately, this has happened to me on more than one occasion. My sister and I both share a room, since I have a family of 5 people, and there are only 3 bedrooms. One night I was on the top bunk of our bunk bed, watching YouTube videos on my old laptop, which I often do every night. It was about 11:20 p.m. My sister was sleeping over at a friend's house that night, so I was alone in our room. The bottom bunk was empty, of course. I was moving on to the next video, you know, that loading portion between the end of the last one and the beginning of the new one, so it was silent in the room for a few seconds. Until I heard it. Breathing. Deep, raspy breathing that sounded like it wanted me to know it was there. It was so sudden that it made me stop breathing and listen. After a moment, it disappeared, leaving me to wonder if it was all in my head, or if I had made the sound and just didn't really realize it. I calmed down after about 20 seconds or so, and began to play the next video. But then the breathing came again. The moment I paused the video, the breathing continued. It was coming from the bottom bunk, and whatever was doing it, I felt like it knew what it was doing. It was trying to scare me, and it definitely worked. I folded my laptop back up and put it beside me, and I curled up into a blanket, hoping that I was really alone and that I didn't know I was in some kind of nightmare. It was only after a few minutes that the breathing stopped, but still, I stayed up all night, paranoid and scared of my own room. What do you think made the breathing sound? Because I sadly failed to come up with an explanation. The Demon in My Room by Otaku Rush. I'm 21 years old and have been fighting an uphill battle with depression for a long time now. In the past year, I've attempted to take my own life twice. Now, my room is small and I'm a believer in the paranormal. A year ago, I started noticing that something was off when my cats avoided coming into my room anymore. It was like a light switch. One day they were fine, and the next day they were terrified of my room. Even when I left the door open, they would stay out and stare in, before eventually and inevitably running off. Then came the knocking in the walls. At first, I thought it was a squirrel or some sort of animal. I even knocked back at it once, trying to scare it away. Of course, I wasn't expecting a response, so you can imagine how shocked I was when I heard whatever was in the wall knock back in return. Eventually, the knocking, which was located in one area, now seemed to be coming from everywhere. I couldn't take it. So at one point, I grabbed a Bible and began to pray. The knocking did stop, but only for a while. About 6 months ago, I was awakened at 3 a.m. to the sounds of loud thudding footsteps coming from the attic above my room. In my sleep-deprived state, I just told whatever was making the racket to shut up and let me sleep. The thudding footsteps only occurred in the attic above my room, and when I told my mom about it, she simply said, "It's probably a squirrel or something. Just your typical omnipresent, hyper-intelligent squirrel, I guess." Things have only gotten worse since then. I've begun waking up in the middle of the night with scratch marks on my body, as well as strange marks that look like teeth. I've been seeing black shadow figures in my peripheral vision in my room, and I'm having awful, vivid nightmares that I cannot wake up from. I've done everything I can to make this demon leave me alone, but I believe it's not going anywhere, and it may be attracted to the negative energy I have. The activity is at its worst when I'm going through a depressive episode. The last incident occurred a week ago. I woke up at 4 a.m. to find huge scratches on my right leg near the ankle. I'm very thankful, though, that I have not seen this entity itself, which is making me feel unwelcome in my own room. Saying a prayer seems to have some effect on it, but it's never permanent. Faerie by Oddfae. I live in the Midwest of the United States. I'm 24, and my boyfriend John and I live in a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet town. But something has been happening for the past few weeks. A couple of months ago, I started noticing things either going missing or things not being where I placed them, and I mean just a few moments before. Like if I were to get ketchup out of the fridge and set it on the counter, or go to the oven to put food on my plate, the ketchup bottle would be gone or moved. If I were to plug my cell phone into the charger, leave the room and come back a few minutes later, it would be unplugged. For a while, I just let these things happen because I figured it was John playing jokes on me. One particular day, John was in a poor mood and snapped at me to stop moving his things. At first, I thought he was joking with me, trying to get a rise out of me. But then I realized I was wrong. For weeks, he genuinely thought I was messing with his stuff. It went on like this for a few weeks, maybe a month. We would make jokes here and there about the ghost moving our things. One morning, I woke up and did my usual routine to get ready for work. John asked me if I had woken up at any point through the night, and I told him no, and asked him what he was talking about. He told me that he woke up in the early morning hours, maybe 3 or 4, and it felt like someone was watching him. Now, in our bedroom, there is no overhead light, so we have lamps instead, and when we sleep, we shut them off. We don't keep a TV in the bedroom either. So there's no light when we sleep, it's just completely dark. He told me that he woke up in the middle of the night, and he saw that there was a figure on the ceiling by the bedroom door. He said it either seemed to be floating, or it was on the ceiling crawling around. As he became more aware and awake, he was horrified, and whatever this being was, it slowly turned its head to look in the door. Then it vanished. John said that it was clear. It was darker than the black of our bedroom, darker than any black he'd seen before. While this scared me as well, I didn't let it get to me, and after a while I forgot about the whole thing. Things started to seem normal again, but I couldn't have been more wrong. About 2 weeks after the figure appeared to John, our things began to get misplaced again. Small things were placed in different parts of the house. Knickknacks were moved and even upside down sometimes. We lost remotes, keys, cell phones, shoes, even my glasses were found on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen after I put them on my bedside table. I was really getting annoyed. I tried smudging our house, blessing candles and burning incense. I thought it was going to get rid of this trickster spirit. A little over a month ago, John and I were watching a movie. We have 2 cats and we were laying in bed, kind of watching the movie and kind of on our phones. Everything was fine until we both saw the same shadowy figure walk right by our closet. Instantly, he grabbed my hand, and I knew he had seen it too. We just lay there quietly for an hour, until we realized that it wasn't going to happen again. We began talking about what we had just seen when one of our cats started acting very strange. He kept running up and down the hallway, only to stop at our room each time and stare at us for a moment. He was in a defensive pose, his tail puffed up, and obviously frightened or angry. At that point, I was crying, telling John to turn on all the lights in the house. After we did, our cat began to relax again and going back to his normal self. About an hour later, we stopped walking about the house and got comfortable again, so John turned off the lights. But once again, the cat was not happy about something in our bedroom. We tried pushing him in our room, but he was fighting us with everything he had, acting like he'd rather perish than go into our bedroom. After a while, he calmed down and was relaxing on our bed, helping us be able to relax. Things around our house have started feeling darker. Pictures are being knocked over, and we'd come home once to broken candle holders all over the floor, which could have been our cats, but that would be the first time our cats had ever broken anything. We're not ruling them out as a possibility. The energy is just feeling darker though, which brings me to why I'm telling this story. About 3 weeks ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. I instantly remembered the story that John had told me about seeing the figure, so I was a bit scared and tried to go back to sleep as fast as possible. As I was rolling over, I made the mistake of opening my eyes to look around. In the corner of our bedroom, behind the slightly closed door, stood a 6-foot-tall figure. Just like John's description, the figure was darker than the night around it. It was almost like it was radiating blackness. I lost my breath and froze mid-roll. I stared at this thing. Suddenly, heavy black wings protruded sickeningly from its back, and it disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. I could feel tears in my eyes as I began to breathe again, and I woke up John, feeling like whatever it was still there, still watching. I frantically told John what I saw, and he got up to turn the lights on. I cried as I hysterically told him about the figure, about the wings. To my horror, he told me that when he had seen the figure, he saw wings as well. He had left that part out because he couldn't even believe it himself. Needless to say, we did not go back to sleep that night. It's been about 3 weeks since I've seen this figure. Objects in our house have stopped moving, and everything seems to be going back to normal, for now. John and I have been researching, and what we think we've seen is a dark fairy of some sort. Some humanoid creature with wings, radiating dark energy, and tormenting us any way it can. We're going to continue researching whatever this could be, and how to get rid of it. Hopefully, it's had its fun, and it's gone now. I'd feel much safer knowing that whatever the creature was, it's no longer watching us sleep. Whenever night falls and I go to bed, I expect my bedroom to be quiet, peaceful, and most importantly, I expect that only my wife and myself are in the room. So could you imagine someone's horror when they wake up in the middle of the night and see that they weren't alone all along? What would you do if you saw some stranger staring at you while you sleep? If you saw some creepy, inhuman creature crawling on the ceiling watching you? If you woke up and something was chewing on your flesh? I'd say it's about time to burn the house down and get out of there. But to each his own, I guess. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can go to darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for stories from backpackers and scary stories from Halloween. If you want to support my channel further, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails and donate any amount. If you do, you'll get your name in the credits at the end of these videos, And you'll unlock MP3 ad-free downloads of each video here on out. If you've got some extra cash and you're all out of clothes for whatever weird, freaky reason you have, click the shop button below to get some of my merchandise, or go to teespring.com/darkprevails. Thank you. Now, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 10 real sea monster sightings. Kane7ify says, "Thar she blows." Did you just assume it's gender? You know, boy whales can blow too, and they're pretty good at it. Jason Stott says, "Totally commenting after I watched the video. Thanks for the vids, Darkness. Helps a lot with homework." Well, it's easy when the only homework I give you is to survive, and you're very welcome. Whirly says, "Fueling my fear of the ocean with no regret. It's the ocean. It's deep, it's wide, and alien creatures come out from the darkest depths. What is there not to be afraid of out there?" Hasek says, "Love your videos. Your channel comes with quality and quantity." Thank you very much for saying that. Horror narrators like myself are constantly attacked because people think this is easy. I don't view myself as talented, but it does take a lot of time to put this together, and it requires cooperation between you guys and myself, because that's what my show is about, giving a voice to people who have experienced something strange, while giving the world something creepy to spook their evenings. Also, I do try to stick to an every other day schedule for my own sanity. And Sweetheart Sonia says, "I guess SpongeBob isn't the only creature to live under the sea in a pineapple." If I lived under the sea, my fruit of choice would be a T-bone steak. Who lives in a T-bone steak under the sea? This guy. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails episode. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.